Hey friends, welcome back to Thrive Online Healing Podcast. This is episode 72, and we're tackling COVID. We're going to talk about the variants of it, like Delta, and I'm going to let Dr. Carmen take it over.
All right. So I wanted to take this opportunity to visit with you guys a little bit about COVID because COVID cases are on the increase, right? Across the board, but definitely here in Oklahoma as well. And kind of explaining what this Delta variant is and how it kind of came about. Okay. And then we can kind of go into some other things. So when we're thinking about viruses in general, right? I just want to talk about like how viruses work, if you will, or what they're programmed to do. So it's an organism, right? It's a microorganism, just like any other bug or pathogen, but it's programmed to survive, right? It's programmed to stay alive. So just like, we think we are programmed, right, for survival mode as mammals, this has the same programming in viruses. And so the idea behind the viruses is once it occupies a host, right, and it begins to grow and thrive, it wants to occupy other hosts. So that virus can continue to thrive and grow. Okay. Now, if that host dies, that it's not necessarily in the for the benefit of the virus, because the virus is hoping that it can occupy, right? It can spread, it can expose more hosts, so it can multiply. So over time, viruses in general, so influenza does this as well. So do the common cold. We have different strains. That's all variants are. They're different strains. And those strains occur because of the mutation that says, hey, I want to thrive and survive, so I'm going to become more infectious. Okay. So that means that it's more contagious, if you will, or it's easier to for that virus to occupy the host. So it has adaptations where it can attach to cells quicker, more efficiently, and then create and begin to multiply, right, to infect that host. It also creates mechanisms in which it can be spread more. So things like sneezing, coughing, right, running noses. Oftentimes viruses will create those symptoms so that they can expose other hosts and be infected by other hosts and or infect other hosts. And so it finds ways to be a little bit more infectious. But as the virus continues to grow, like I said, it wants to be less pathogenic, so it's less likely to kill the host.
So tell us what pathogenic means. What is
So
that?
pathogenic means essentially deadly, right? Essentially, it's a more severe illness.
Okay.
Yeah, essentially it would be more deadly. Yeah. Okay. So we're seeing that now with COVID, right? It's the sort of the natural progression of viruses is that it's becoming more infectious. So we're seeing more and more people getting infected because those symptoms now are a little bit milder than they were back in 2019, right? It's still occupying the similar cells, those ACE receptors on our cells, in our lungs, in our nervous system, on our kidneys, but that it may look like the symptoms may look like allergies, right? Like that runny nose, maybe like a lot of people thinking they're getting summer colds, and it's actually COVID, because it's just a little bit of a milder symptom pattern. And then the virus is doing that, right, so that it can you don't feel as sick, so you'll still go out in public and be around more people, so that the virus has opportunity to infect more hosts.
Yeah. So tell the people, I think when I was in biochemistry, this was really helpful to understand how viruses, like what goes on, like in terms of like a virus is this organism that comes
Yes.
into my body and then it attaches to my cell, like explaining that so people understand like how it works. Like from what I understand is it attaches to the cell and then it makes its way into our DNA code,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
then our DNA code is constantly unwinding, making new cells, right? And it takes that piece of information that it's put into our DNA code and then it replicates out. Is that correct?
Okay,
So I think
almost.
understand that.
Okay, so what a virus does, yeah, it attaches to our cells and then it inserts itself into our cell. It targets the nucleus of the cell, which is where the DNA is stored. Okay. That virus has its own set of instructions, its own DNA. In this case, we're talking about mRNA viruses. So it has its own mRNA, which the mRNA is like the factory. Okay, so like the DNA and the genes tell you what to make, the factory actually makes it.
Okay.
Okay, so it inserts this RNA into the nucleus of the cell, and so then it's the cell starts creating the pieces of the virus. Okay, so it starts creating the capsid, which is kind of like the capsule of the virus. It starts creating the I don't know in COVID if it's a tail, but it's like the appendages of the virus that actually attaches to the cells so that it can insert that mRNA into another cell. Okay.
Like its arms and its legs.
Yeah, essentially it's telling the cell, hey, make my capsule. Like if you imagine that kind of like a head, make my arms, it makes my legs. And then the virus puts those pieces together, and it doesn't have a regulation button, right? So it's telling that cell, produce these mRNA or these pieces, produce them until the cell dies, and then it releases those viruses out into the bloodstream so that they can attack other cells in the area.
Okay.
So that's sort of the
realms our immune system can't keep up then, because then it becomes overwhelmed. Like we have 1,000 soldiers and
yes.
Now it's been invaded with 1,000,000. And
exactly
get sick because it's like, I can't fight 1,000,000 people. There's 1,000 of us.
Yes. So that's one component of it. The other component, and this is what's tricky with viruses, is because they insert themselves into that original cell or group of cells. And so they are hidden from the immune system, because while they're inside that cell, getting the cell to create all the pieces, the arms, the legs, and the capsule, then the immune system is still doing its rounds, right? It's still looking for invaders, but it can't find them because it's actually the virus is inside the cell. So until that cell ruptures and releases all those viruses that are already built together, right, the immune system's already at a little bit of a disadvantage.
And then, because I want to draw this point home with people, that's for a healthy, active, does not eat the American diet person.
Yes.
So then we take a person who already has I won't be judgy. We take a person that has a handicapped immune system because of their personal choices, diet, lack of exercise, diabetes, high blood pressure, and their immune system has already been handicapped before this even happened.
Exactly. So their soldiers are not fit. They're not 100%, right? So they may not have 1,000 soldiers show up. They may only have 100 soldiers show up. They may have that 1,000, but only a quarter of them are willing and able and ready to be able to fight anything off, right? Just because your immune system shows up, it has to be working, right? It has to be optimal. Otherwise, it's not able to address the infection, right? Whatever it is.
I wanted to clear that up so people understood what was going on. So.
Yes, yeah, that's how all viruses work, right? So even if it was the common cold or the flu or another viral infection, that's sort of its mechanism of action. What's a little bit different with COVID is that it does target specific cells or specific receptors on the cells. And since this is a new virus overall, we're getting to see the progression of that virus within our environment, right? Unfortunately, we're getting that firsthand experience now. Yes, yeah. So let's see. The other thing, okay, so the other thing that I wanted to talk about, not just with the Delta virus and with the COVID, is that what we're also seeing is a lot of co-infections. Okay, so because COVID has a tendency to overwhelm the immune system, right? So that cell ruptures, it releases all those viruses within the bloodstream, those viral cells. And so they're attaching themselves to other cells and doing the same thing. So if the immune system is not on it, right? If it's not optimal and kind of 100%, then as those that is there and active when the cell ruptures and releases those viruses, those viral cells, and those viral cells inhabit a new cell and goes back into a new cell to do the same thing. That window of opportunity the immune system had to target those cells may be gone.
Okay.
All right. So one more reason why we kind of have to be on top of it. Okay. So, and work with the optimal immune system. The other fact is that oftentimes when our immune system is overwhelmed with this viral infection, it opens up the door for other co-infections.
Because you don't have enough soldiers. Like if we go back to the war, I like visuals, so I like the war scenario, right? Like if we're at war with Kalamazoo, I'm just making up places, right?
Yeah.
My soldiers are focusing on those soldiers. So then New Zealand can sneak up on my backside because I'm paying attention to these guys and start attacking.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. And that's what we're seeing. And there's a lot of, so that virus or whatever infection that may sneak up behind, or it may already be in our body, and it could just be an opportunist. It's just waiting for our immune system to be so occupied that it's like, hey, this is my chance, right? So we're seeing those co-infections. So the co-infections with pneumonia or the flu, influenza A or B, with strep, are making people sicker. So it may not necessarily be the COVID, the symptoms of COVID that are making people sick and ending them up or having them end up in the hospital. It's those co-infections that are riding alongside it. So now your body is being asked to address 2, sometimes even 3 different infections, right? It might be a bacterial infection, might be 2 viral infections, or a bacterial and a viral infection. And so it just gets overwhelming. And so that's why, it's a little bit can be challenging for our body to overcome that, because it's being bombarded from different directions by different pathogens at the same time.
Right. So we have COVID, they have 1,000 soldiers. We have strep throat, they have 1,000 soldiers. And let's say pneumonia has 1,000 soldiers.
Yes. Yeah.
I only had 200 soldiers to send out, and now I'm having to battle 3,000. Of course, they're going to overwhelm, and it's going to take me a lot longer to try to do some just survival.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm seeing, so to drive home, the idea of optimal health and trying to support our immune system and our body, right, with the anti-inflammatory diet, making sure that we're not eating a lot of junk and creating a lot of inflammation in our body. Because what we're seeing is those folks who have more inflammation are having worse outcomes, right? With surviving and with trying to overcome these infections. The other thing, especially in the summertime, dehydration. We've got to drink water, okay? Those folks who are
Carmen, like they don't like
I know.
I went to the drag races.
Yeah.
This little boy had a red fruit drink that he drank because he was wrestling. They were wrestling.
Yeah.
And then he picks up a Pepsi. I'm like, that's terrible parenting. Yes, humans, if you're listening to, super judgy right there. Yes. But that's not hydration. That's sugar.
Yeah. That's inflammation. And so I'm seeing those folks that are dehydrated. This is what we're seeing in the hospitals. The people who are dehydrated, worse outcomes. Yeah. Even if it's dehydration in the flu, right? It doesn't even have to be COVID. But if we're dehydrated because we're not drinking water, because it's summertime, people are working out a lot, are working outside, they are sweating quite a bit. But even if you have a fever and you're sweating a lot, or if you're vomiting a lot, you've got to rehydrate with water, not with tea and not with soda
lemonade or beer.
Yeah. Because if your cells are dehydrated, there's no way that they're able to keep up with that. If they're having a constant exposure, if they're getting exposed to to a lot of viral pathogens at once, they just can't do it, right? You're asking your body to protect you, but you're not giving it any of the equipment to do it. It's like, oh, you're sending those soldiers out there with nothing. You're like, oh, you're on your own.
Karate. Good luck.
Yeah.
Sorry, the enemy has AK-47s, but you're gonna have to use your karate skills. Good luck.
Exactly. It's one of those things. We talk about it lighthearted, but it's directly translating, in the real world at how people are surviving and getting over their COVID infections and their multiple pathogenic infections. Because most of the ones that I'm seeing and I'm hearing of in the hospital it's not just one, it's that 2-3 infections. And if you're dehydrated on top of that, it doesn't look good. And so those are things we can do on a regular basis, right? We may take drinking water for granted, or people, I don't get this as much anymore, but at the beginning of my practice, I had a lot of people tell me, I don't like the taste of water. And it's like, okay, that's an excuse, right?
Yeah, you're not 5.
Yeah, let's figure out what it is you don't like about water. Is it because you're so used and you're addicted to sugar and it's like if you're comparing water to soda or water to sweet tea, okay, it doesn't taste the same, but we've got to do something different.
You're so sweet. And that's why I'm totally a coach and a CrossFit coach. I'm like, yeah, I don't like paying taxes, but I fucking do. Drink the water.
Drink some water. Yeah. And there's a lot of I'm seeing this now, there's more a lot of IV hydration, liquid IV, electrolytes in your water. We've had Pedialyte, Gatorade, and Powerade forever. Nothing beats just water, right? But if you need electrolytes, or especially if you're sick, electrolytes are really helpful. All those packages are really just fancy salt and potassium. Yeah. Which we can get from the grocery store. We can get Himalayan salt. We can get cream of tartar or low salt that has potassium in it, and, lemonade or, lemons, and make your own electrolyte drink, but you gotta drink water. Yeah.
Even because I get it. It does get, you kind of get bored drinking water all the time. I get it. Okay.
Yeah.
But I even like coconut water, and it has a ton of electrolytes in it.
Yes. Yeah. Coconut water is an excellent, so I'm picky about coconut water because some companies will add sugar to coconut water. Coconut water is naturally already a little bit sweet, so don't get one with sugar in it. That's not really helping you, to be honest. But the pH of coconut water is very similar to our red blood cells. So it's an excellent way to stay hydrated. Yeah, especially if people are sick or if you're sweating a lot. Yeah, coconut water works really well if you like the taste of it.
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
even if you don't, you just
your cells are going to appreciate it. Yeah, because I have a lot of people are like, oh, I'm not thirsty. I'm never thirsty, right? So I don't drink water. Oh, yeah. It doesn't matter whether, if you're thirsty, that means you are already 70% dehydrated, right? Like you don't want to get thirsty. Right. So to maintain that, you still, yeah, we've got to drink water.
Yeah.
Please don't get dehydrated and then get sick. Those are the folks that are having the hardest time right now. Yeah. Especially, I mean, it's summertime. Right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Okay.
What else?
All right. Let's see. Those were my big things that I wanted to cover today in this topic. I'll open it up. Do you have any questions or?
Well, I do. I want to understand if you want to answer this, because I think to people that aren't really exposed to science, like that's not their profession. They don't spend time nerding out to it, right? Yeah. Like the message that's been provided is that the vaccine, like some people, people don't understand, right? They just think it's going to stop and kill COVID if all of us get vaccinated, that it won't be around, right?
Yes.
And they think it means that they won't get it.
Okay.
And they think that it's better. And this is where I get a little irked, is that they think it's better than our immune system, right? Because they don't understand the immune system and how the immune system works. So I get that, right? Like, so that's kind of like, I think we just need to know from a neutral perspective, like how does our immune system work and how does a vaccine work? Because some people are comparing it to like, well, we should get the vaccine because we don't have polio now because everybody got vaccinated.
Oh, okay.
And so they think the same thing with this, where I saw a presentation that was polio, and I may be wrong on this, so correct me. Polio is just a human organism thing, and that's why we could end it somehow.
Yes.
But COVID is a mammal thing, and so the virus is like, fine, you humans don't want to house me for a while, I'll house in your dogs and cats or whatever, what other mammal.
Yes.
But you can never, like, as long as a mammal is alive, I will be around. But that may not be accurate. So I think, like, help us people understand this.
Okay. Yes. So that's a great question. And that is accurate too. Yes, it is accurate as far as like the COVID virus versus polio, is that we call those animal vectors. Okay. In the science world. So if a virus doesn't have an animal vector and only goes from human to human, and you vaccinate all the humans, there aren't hosts available for that virus to occupy or invade, right? Okay. And so this is exactly with COVID. This is the reason with influenza too, right? Like we've heard of influenza, the flu, we've heard of the bird flu, we've heard of the pig flu. The influenza has different animal vectors, right? They
like West Nile.
Yes. Yep. Mosquitoes, okay. Horses, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they have different animal vectors. So as long as there's animal vectors available, that virus is going to continue to grow. It's not going to be eradicated unless we had some way of vaccinating all of the mammals.
Okay.
Yeah. And so some viruses, like let me take the flu, for example, will mutate to different animal vectors, right? Like I said, the swine flu, the bird flu. We do know that it has a tendency to use bats as an animal vector, and bats DNA is very similar to humans, or their immune process is very similar to humans. But that influenza has mutated to occupy pigs and occupy other birds and ducks and chickens and all this stuff, right?
Okay.
And we know early on with COVID that it was occupying, I think it was chickens or ducks in the markets in China. And so we know that it has animal vectors, right? So not just mammals, because so if it goes to chickens and birds, right, they're just animal vectors. So you can't compare the vaccine progress with polio to be with the vaccine progress of COVID. You're comparing
only a human.
Yeah.
Is it a virus?
Yes, polio virus. Yes.
Yes. So it was only, and it couldn't go to animals. So
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So you're comparing apples and oranges. Yeah. If you're trying to do that. Yeah. There's other, yes. Okay. So I was gonna say there's other viruses that are similar that we can't say that they've eradicated them with vaccines, but they've drastically reduced the mortality of them in humans. So like the Hib vaccine with kids, the Haemophilus influenza, back in the 80s, babies were dying from Hib. And so then they started the vaccine regimen. And now, we don't have to worry about that as much as we did even 30, 40 years ago. Right. Yeah. So, but it didn't have animal vectors.
Okay.
So yes, that to understand that is very important, because then it helps us to kind of keep our understanding and kind of what are our realistic expectations, right, of this vaccine.
Yeah.
Or any vaccines, to be honest. Yeah. So the idea behind vaccines is that COVID's a little bit different than other vaccines that we've had in the past, right? Because you guys have probably heard it's an RNA virus or an RNA vaccine. And so it is creating the opportunity when we become vaccinated with COVID, it's creating the opportunity for our cells to, it takes that RNA, a lot like the virus injects RNA into our body and makes those spike proteins, which is part of the like arms and legs, if you will, of the virus. Mm-hmm. And so with the vaccine, instead of the virus telling your body to create those spike proteins, now this vaccine is giving the body the messages to do that. So then your body creates these spike proteins. Well, when the cell ruptures, okay, instead of the whole virus being released, now it's just these spike proteins that are floating around. Your immune system, those soldiers are on guard, right? Like they're doing their rounds. Yeah. And they see these spike proteins and they're like, hey, these spike proteins shouldn't be here. So then they mount a response to those spike proteins, right? Well, what? We
call antibodies, right?
Yes, antibodies. So what is awesome about the design of our immune system is that those antibodies have a memory. Okay. So that if we're exposed to spike proteins in the future, our body says, hey, we've seen these before. These are not supposed to be here, send out the soldiers. Okay. So the idea is that your immune system can get ahead of it because it's already on the lookout for spike proteins. Okay. So that when the virus attaches to that original cell and sends the RNA and gets that cell to replicate all the pieces, before it hides in that cell, your immune system is already on alert and catches it early before it's able to, produce even more viral cells.
So there's still people that get vaccinated are still going to get it. It's just their immune system, their soldiers already have a map of where the enemy's going to be hiding.
Exactly. It doesn't keep you from getting sick.
Yeah.
It doesn't keep you from not getting COVID. Yeah. So that's why a lot of people were like, oh gosh, I got the vaccine and thinking I wouldn't have to worry about COVID. I wouldn't have to get as sick as, everybody else I see getting sick. And it doesn't keep you, it doesn't protect you from getting COVID.
Mhm.
Okay. But yes, it gives your immune system that roadmap. It helps those soldiers have that memory of those antibodies that says, hey, yeah, we've seen this before. We know that it's not supposed to be here. Let's attack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the idea is if it attacks, if it's on alert, then you're less likely to get as ill.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's the goal of the vaccines in general. So a lot of folks, I mean, we're seeing the statistics, right? Like of all the hospitalizations of COVID, they're comparing those who are vaccinated versus unvaccinated. Well, it's kind of silly to compare that because it's like, well, it's not going to protect them. And now that we've kind of, I don't know, the vaccine's been out since January. We're in what, month 7 now? We're starting to see the actual effectiveness of these vaccines. And so I don't know that I'm going to say this right, so I kind of hate to say it, but you can look it up. But I think the latest numbers are that the Johnson & Johnson is now considered 40% effective. And the, I don't know if the other one is the Moderna or Pfizer. I want to say it's Pfizer, but it is now, they're calculating it like 68, not quite 70%.
Yeah.
Effective, right? So we didn't have those numbers before, right? Because all they were saying it was 98% effective based on what was in the lab and what was in a petri dish. So now that we're getting the data from human vectors, they're getting a better picture as to what that looks like. Yeah. So what's different with folks who are not vaccinated, right? And the importance of having your immune system be optimal is that your immune system can still create those antibodies, right? It can still send out those soldiers, recognize the COVID virus and that spike protein is foreign and not part of us, just as effectively if your immune system is 100% optimal, right? If your immune system's a little bit sluggish, it's going to be a slower process.
Right.
But your immune system is built to recognize things that are not foreign. Our body, doesn't have those spike proteins. And so it would be, a little bit, a similar process, and the immune system's doing the same thing. It's just kind of a matter of timing that's a little bit different.
So for those of us that have had COVID, right?
Yes.
It's essentially like, instead of me taking the vaccine and having these spike proteins, so my soldiers could have a roadmap and knew what military equipment to bring, right?
Yes.
I just went ahead and took the enemy in. And now it knows if I'm exposed to it again, like, oh, we know you.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's the same concept as the vaccine. I just took a harder hit by the enemy versus pieces of the enemy.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. That's how our immune system works, is that if you've already been exposed and you've already had COVID, your body has those memory cells. You've created the antibodies.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, what's different with potential future exposures is that if the variants are different, those spike proteins might look a little bit different. The immune system will still recognize them, right? Mm-hmm. So again, your immune system's already on alert. So it's more likely you'll have less symptoms because your body's already on top of it. It's just that spike protein, what your immune system has memorized, it may only be 98, 97% of what the spike protein looks like now with these new strains.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and I mean, our body's very smart. So our body still says, hey, this is still something that shouldn't be here.
Yeah.
So it'll still address it. Much like those antibodies made by the vaccine will. What they don't know is how long those antibodies from the vaccine last, right? We don't know.
What does that mean even? Like how long it lasts, like how long my soldiers keep this information memorized? Like at what point do they forget? Is that what we're saying?
Essentially, like at what point do they lose that map? Right. Yeah. Essentially.
When I'm exposed to the virus, does my body lose the map ever?
You're exposed to the virus.
Right? Like I had COVID, my soldiers
Yes.
have the map. Like, wouldn't they just always have that map?
Well, so technically they could, but what happens is that our body tries to be very efficient. Right. So if you're not constantly getting exposed, your body says eventually, oh, we're exposed to all these other things. We have so much room to keep these maps. This one is less likely.
We're going to archive it.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense, right? Like I have a file cabinet for my immune system, and it's like, all right, these are what we've been exposed to. Here's all our maps. We haven't been exposed to chicken pox, right? 30 years. We're just going to go ahead and archive that file.
Exactly. So you see this with other vaccines too, like the tetanus booster, right? Like they recommend the tetanus booster every 10 years because after about, 9 or 10 years, if you haven't been exposed to tetanus, your body's like, well, we don't need to keep this in the forefront, right? Yeah, let's archive it. So that's why they recommend boosters like that, is because your body's, we're exposed to things on a daily basis, whether we know it or not. Okay. Right. Yeah. And oftentimes our body is healthy enough to not let that bacteria, that parasite, that pathogen, the virus take hold and create a level of illness in our body. And so it's constantly on alert. So it has to be efficient and figure out, okay, what is the priority in terms of what I should be looking for that's foreign.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. Hopefully that gives folks a little bit better understanding of, kind of what to expect, how our body reacts to the vaccines, how they react to viruses and viruses, specifically COVID, and even, these variants. What does this mean? And even what does it mean in the future? That may be a little bit unknown, or what are we, to expect. So
cool. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Carmen.
All right. You're welcome. Thanks.
All right. We'll see you guys next week. If you have any, we would love if you guys could leave us a review on wherever you're listening to. That helps move our podcast up in the charts so people can actually get exposed to our podcast and we can spread the information. That's what our hope is. So we appreciate you guys taking the time to leave us reviews.
Yeah. Thank you.